Working on some questions and comments here. Board gaming perspective, Fritz. Then I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What is the most punishing board game that you own? Now, this is a fine line. I do enjoy board games that pose a challenge, that require a level of complexity in terms of thinking, strategy, resource development, planning stage by stage, and then trying to execute that plan. If we inject a little bit of random to mess with the plan, that makes it all the more interesting. An example, and this isn't necessarily my most punishing game, vote, I'm going to narrow it down to one, Xenoshift. This is a lane defense game. You have Xenos attacking, and you have your soldiers and tech and equipment. It's a card-based game defending against it. And you have to defend 9 rounds. And that is a very, very punishing, very, very challenging game on there, even when you know the strategies. Everything has to be really, really complex. If your base takes enough damage, you lose the game. I'm fine for games like that. The challenge with games that are punishing is that it's one thing to play them solo. I can play Xenoshift and lose and lose and lose, but it's not necessarily the game or my first choice game that I would bring to play at a gaming event or a club, because people are going to get very frustrated if it's like, look, I only have an hour to play gaming this week and I just get brutalized on the table. Where's the fun in that? Unless you know ahead of time, and that's your board gaming, that's your player personality. But Xenoshift is very, very punishing. I do have a problem with games that want to be elite, so they ramp up the difficulty level just because. Rather than having a sophisticated AI or a sophisticated mechanic, it's like we're going to take the lazy shortcut in terms of difficulty and just boost up the power level. Example might be most encounters at a lower level would roll 1d6 and add power. Well, rather than having sophisticated interactions, let's just have all encounters roll 2d6 while you just roll 1d6. Like, if it's obvious you're making this game challenging by brute force alone, those really kind of, I don't want to go in that direction. So my vote of good game design, which, okay, the title that I'm going to bring up, if you have it, if you played it, you might not fully agree it's good game design. It was a Games Workshop title. That kind of tells you what you need to know, but it was not designed by Games Workshop. 13% success rate. 4 players sit down to play. The chances of winning on average, 13%. Should you win this game, we have a tradition, and we have a lot of names in the box, but not as many. You sign your name on the inside of the box, and you date it. You are essentially immortalized on there. Dungeon Quest. Dungeon Quest, we need a reprint. GW has that license. They're pumping out Talisman everywhere, and I love Talisman. They're pumping out Talisman's kids version and 40K storybooks for kids and everything. Can we just get a Dungeon Quest reprint? A solid reprint. The narrative of the game is essentially 4 players, or 1 to 4 players. You can play solo. You go into a dungeon that is generated by randomly drawing and flipping tiles. You have to make it to the center of the dungeon where the dragon has the treasure hoard. The dragon's going to wake up. The dragon's going to be very angry. You have a number of turns, which represents game turns before the dungeon seals itself, and you can adjust the terms based on difficulty. Whoever makes it out with the most loot wins the game. So you could go in, loot a couple of rooms, get a bag of gold, get a couple of magic objects, and just get out of there, play it safe. Once you exit the dungeon, you cannot go back in on there. Obviously, the most loot is in the center of the table, the Dragon Hoard, where you can really get some powerful artifacts and magic items and treasure. The dungeon changes as you move. Rooms shift, there's traps, there's ways to explore. Everything is beyond extremely swingy and lethal and absolutely crazy. The Catacombs expansion, which I think is built into the current out-of-print where the previous version, it wasn't expansion, means you could fall down a pit and now you're in the catacombs wandering around where there's all sorts of crazy stuff. The game is very, very maddening, but you have to approach it from the perspective of, this is a race game. I'm going in. I'm probably going to die. It's a light RPG dungeon crawl, get the loot, get in, out. Why I enjoy it, besides the lethality, it pushes those invisible buttons that certain types of board gamers have. The loot collectors, the power gamers, the ones that want to just the type of people that play a rogue or a thief in AD&D, where you motivate them by treasure. They're going to try and gobble up as much as they can. This leads to some very, very push your luck, interesting scenarios, especially where if they're pushing their luck because they're greedy, gobbling everything up, then I got to get a little bit of greed in here too. I got to take a little bit of your loot, and I got to get the most and get out of the dungeon. But heavy, hard, punishing, unforgiving mechanics in there, but the game was designed that way with that success rate. So looking across, and certainly when you win a game that's very challenging and has a high difficulty level, you really feel a sense of accomplishment. You feel something there. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What would be a couple of titles that the difficulty level through game design, as opposed to just throwing on, D6s to make the enemies more powerful, what designs are potent? What designs are powerful? What game titles should I be looking at to add to my collection?